I mentioned resource constraints before. Think about that. There's only so many people to go around. The FBI is about 34,000 people, about 14,000 agents, about 3,000 analysts covering the entire country. For example, in FBI Miami, we had about 100, 110 analysts, and there's no way they could look through the 6.5 million people of South Florida, all the social media posts, people traveling through here, all the tourists, and expect to look at just keywords and hope that you're going to find that needle in a haystack or a needle in a pile of needles, which is more likely. And then also, as I mentioned earlier, it's not really a linear problem. It's more of a 3D dimensional model, and I tried to depict that here in the next several slides. Here's what I believe is fiction. As I mentioned in my intro, the terrorists get together, they come up with this plot. Hey, let's go ahead and bomb the Miami-Dade Police Department. And each of those dots represents a separate, distinguishable act conducted by those terrorists to carry out that attack. So it could be surveillance, it could be obtaining funds, it could be sending emails to each other, it could be a dry run, it could be obtaining the explosive materials, obtaining the shrapnel or nails from Home Depot, or a pressure cooker, or buying something. Any contact they would have with somebody else, each of those would be a separate dot. And it used to take, and my information is a few years old, it used to take on average 6 months from the time when a terrorist plotted an attack to when that attack was attempted or carried out. Now, in several cases, we've seen that decision-making cycle be reduced drastically when somebody makes that decision to carry out an attack. And then finally, the terrorist operation would either be attempted or succeed, and the media and the pundits would come back and say, well, if we only knew that seventh dot was surveillance, we could have got ahead of the problem. Next slide, slide 5. This is really more an accurate depiction of what it is, connecting the dots. It's more of a 3D representational model. And if you have this in a, which you should do in the screen show format, you'll see that there are several builds on this. So please get it in the screen show format so you can see that. The first click just shows you the different threats that are out there. Each of these colors, each of these blocks represent a different threat. So the red might be actual terrorist activity that's going on. The yellow's suspicious activity. We get those all the time too. Hey, there's a Middle Eastern looking guy taking a picture of a cruise ship off of Biscayne Bay. Well, I got news for you. If you're from Nebraska and you come down here, you think a lot of Latins look like Middle Easterns. And what do people do on vacations? They take pictures. They take pictures of cruise ships. They take pictures of the star homes, of the tall buildings. Do you think the New York Police Department could respond to everybody taking a picture of the Empire State Building, right? So there's suspicious activity. It could be stolen boats. It could be somebody buys a large quantity of fertilizer. There's also chatter. You might have heard that word before. Hey, we see chatter is up. There might be an attack coming. And what that represents is maybe not the actual words somebody are saying, but if the phone calls emanating from a specific village in Pakistan where we know terrorists are camped out, historically are 100 a day and now they're 1,000 a day, that would be a spike. So we would say, okay, there's more talk, or maybe more human sources would be reporting on something. And disinformation, represented by the blue cubes. You can bet that we spread disinformation whenever we're trying to do a military operation, just to try to make it more successful, increase the odds. Wouldn't you think that the terrorists might do that as well? And then finally, there's one actual plot going on that's in the formative stages that is going to be carried out. So the reds could be, the terrorists are flying somewhere, they're training, they're plotting, but the actual one where they have an actual target picked out is the purple one. Now, go ahead and click it again. Each of the columns represents different domains that you're going to see. So airspace, cyber, and ground. So is the attack going to be used through the air, a 9/11 type of plot, or is it going to be using drones? In space, is it going to be a hacking attempt? Anything like that? Is it going to be state-sponsored? Cyber, is there going to be a cyber attack? Are they just going to do a denial of service? Or they're going to try to interrupt the SCADA systems, which are systems that control the physical movement of equipment for dams, water treatment centers, electrical places, and those are often attached to the internet and can be hacked. And if successful, obviously if somebody's controlling a dam or electrical SCADA equipment from a distance and have nefarious intent, that could be problematic. And finally, ground. Is it going to be a complex attack, which means somebody goes into an area with a fence, say at US Southcom, and sets off a car bomb right there at the gate. So that opens up the gate, and then a swarm of attackers would come in with small arms or grenades or small explosives. So there's a lot of different domains that are included in these threats, and we're responsible as law enforcement and intelligence agencies to look at all of these. Go ahead and click it again. You can see the next one says planning, right? So all of these threats that are going on are different stages of planning. First one could just be somebody's idea in the head. Hey, I'm mad at this country for what they're doing in Syria, Iraq, Pakistan, Latin America, you name it. And I think I want to do something. So it could be at the very, aspirational level. I want to do something. Or they could actually be going out and practicing, raising money, doing dry runs. So it's different progressions along that planning scale. Next one is collection. So what if you were watching one terrorist group and they're planning something going this way, or even if you're not watching them, but your collection is elsewhere. Say you're looking at terrorist group ISIS out of Syria, but because we have more intel research over Syria, we're not really looking at Northern Africa as much. So maybe we're collecting all in Syria, but the actual planning is going on in Northern Africa. So if your collection does not match up to what the terrorists want to do, then obviously that's a big disconnect. And that could happen with human sources. If all your human sources are 70-year-old men that aren't going to have insight into homegrown violent extremists or into ISIS, then you're missing the boat. The same thing with the mafia or the mob in New York, the old established families. If you think you're going to send a non-national, non-Italian into the Italian organized crime and to infiltrate, then you're mistaken, right? So you have to make sure you have that human collection or the other types of collections as well. Next click will show you the analysis. So what if you're collecting in the right place? We are collecting in Northern Africa, but you missed the analysis. Your analysis says, we just think this is routine activity on behalf of the terrorists. They don't have the capability. It's just what they want to do. Yet the plot is further along than you imagine or that you analyze. The next click is dissemination. Say we had a terrorist threat that we thought was going to happen in Miami, and it's going to be used in a speedboat, and they're going to ram the side of an oil tanker or of a cargo ship or of a cruise ship. And they're going to explode it just like they did in the coal. And what if we send that to the ports of Miami and the port of Everglades, but the attack actually happens down in Key West, right? Something we might not normally be looking at as far as intel community or law enforcement. You're looking at the major targets. So you collected it all in the right place. You knew who was going to do it and when they were going to do it. You analyzed it correctly, but you sent it to the wrong place. You didn't disseminate it widely or effectively. Go ahead and do the next click, or it might take two. So, isn't that cool how I figured that out with PowerPoint? I wish I could knew. In fact, if you can imagine this cube, it's all static, but really it should be a three-dimensional cube, like a Rubik's Cube that's constantly rotating through time and space. Because some of these threats stop, somebody gets arrested, some of them start, some of them fizzle out, some of them will start up again later, some are just aspirational. So all this is going on throughout time and space. So we have one terrorist activity over here in the planning section. Go ahead and click again. And then we have another one in collection, another one in dissemination, and click on through. Yet they're all in different stages, and your collection is disparate, right? You have collection going on in several different arenas. And then finally, that terrorist plot happens elsewhere. So there's a lot of different terrorist activity out there, but that one plot that you wanted to find, you weren't able to attack because either your collection, analysis, planning, or dissemination did not match up. Okay, your next build should take you to the next slide where it's a small cube. So now you have all those different domains. Don't forget the cube is moving through time and space, and you have different plots, you have disinformation, you have a lot of false information coming into you, false leads. You might have heard a few in South Florida where they emptied out the malls, the Dolphin Mall, International Mall, because somebody heard gunshots. But in reality, in one case anyway, it was firecrackers to serve as a distraction for theft. So you have a lot of different activity going on, and you have potential threats to schools, all these things that take up law enforcement activity. Now click it again and you'll see the filters portion come up. So you have all this activity coming in, but you're resource constrained. You only have so many people, so much funding to look at these terrorist groups or criminal groups, and then so many organizations to do it, right? We can't be everywhere at once, and you might not have the right people. They might not be trained enough. If it's some new WhatsApp and we don't have the visibility to look at it, or you don't have the funding for whatever software that you needed, or the satellite, or any other collection method. And then the organizations, is it the FBI's job? Is it the CIA's job? Is it DIA's? Who's supposed to be looking at this one threat? So you have all these different filters as well. Click it again, you'll see different types of environment. You'll see denied, contested, and permissive. Permissive might be something like Iraq, when we were in Iraq, or Afghanistan, where we really have the ability to collect human, imint, SIGINT without any interference. The U.S., some people would say, is permissive environment. However, keep in mind that because of the constitutional rights of citizens, there has to be a judge that signs off on anything that you do, and you do have to have probable cause before you're able to wiretap somebody, or even put a tracker on their cars nowadays, or even to get their phone data. You need some kind of authority to sign off on that it's regarding a potential threat. So contested might be, the Soviet Union, the old Soviet Union, or Russia today, or even, Iran, let's say, where we don't really have the ability to put human sources everywhere. We can't look at everything with our satellites because some things are underground. They're very ComSec or communication security oriented, so they can't look really at their all of their signals intelligence coming off there. And then finally you have denied, and that would be something like North Korea, which would be extremely hard target. Once again, you're not going to send somebody who looks like me into North Korea to be a human spy, right? So it's a very difficult country to penetrate. Go ahead and click it again. You'll see the green arrow. And then finally, through all this, you as an analyst are supposed to come out with that one piece of information that says, yes, we are confident, we are highly confident that this terrorist group is going to conduct an attack at this time, at this place, using this method, and here are the people involved. So that's really the responsibility of the analyst, to take all those considerations in and all the restrictions that have to do with that and come up with that information. And again, this doesn't have to be just terrorism. It could be a new healthcare fraud scam, could be a new check fraud scam. Go ahead and click it again. So reasons for intelligence failures. So you get a failure of communication, 9/11 attacks, the Fort Hood attack. Somebody had information somewhere that didn't get to the right people, or they didn't place the right importance on it. And this has happened, and this is going to happen, where even the Parkland shooting, you saw that, hey, we reported it that we thought this kid was going to be a threat. And that also happened on the attempted Detroit airliner bombing, when the father went into the embassy and said, I think my son is a danger. So you can imagine how many times we get information like that, hey, this person is a potential threat, this person's crazy. We're very limited, even with the Boston Marathon bombers. We'll discuss that and what we can do. After you talk to the individuals, you investigate, you do all the right intelligence work on them, what you can do to keep following them around for 24 hours for years and years and years. Nobody really has the resources to do that. Go ahead and click again. You see a failure of imagination. Again, the 9/11 attacks. Nobody had thought at that time that, hey, they're going to take aircraft and plow them into buildings. WMD in Iraq. Could those aluminum tubes be used for something else other than making WMD? I know they like to say that's a U.S. intel failure, but all U.S. Or all international agencies, all the major ones, were all saying the same thing. And that goes into so much of groupthink and confirmation bias, which we'll talk about here in a few weeks as well. And failure of follow-up. So as I mentioned, the resource constraints of the Boston Marathon bombers. The FBI had talked to them, they had looked at them, they talked to people that knew them, and if somebody is investigated and there's nothing that they find, that the investigators find, and there's no reason to keep surveilling them, as law enforcement, we have to follow the Constitution. If you don't have probable cause, you can't keep looking at somebody from an investigative standpoint. There are very strict restrictions on that. And if somebody, one of your friends, one of your past relationships reported you to the FBI or Miami-Dade, said, hey, we think this person is going to do something crazy. Those are called poison pens. By the way, we'll talk about those in the future too. And they give you a poison pen to law enforcement. Would you really want to be followed and surveilled and have your phones wiretapped indefinitely? Or once they clear you, is it okay if they move on? And the same with 9/11 attacks, right? Some people had information on certain aspects of that, but there was little to no follow-up on that. Go ahead and click again. So in addition to failure of communication, imagination, follow-up, there's also resources. There's also different priorities. Our focus obviously has been at Al-Qaeda and ISIS and somewhat domestic terrorism this last 10, 15 years and homegrown violent extremists. But what if some terrorist group, let's say FARC or the Shining Path or something, reactivates and does something against U.S. interests, maybe not here in the homeland, but overseas? And there's a million other reasons as well. Go ahead and click again. And that's the end. I really wanted to give you the kind of the overview of the connecting the dots and what that means to me. So anytime somebody says connecting the dots, I just want you to kind of keep this in mind, that it's not so easy as a linear threat where you're able to pluck one thing out. And does that happen? Sure. In fact, here in Miami, I think we've arrested 13 people on terrorism charges just in the last 2 or 3 years. The FBI has. So these things do happen. Sometimes we have sources in the right place, or somebody sees some suspicious activity, either online or in person, and they'll report it. We're able to get ahead of that. And that's where, maybe you are finding that cube, and it's less linear than it is more three-dimensional. All right, folks, that's it for this week. As always, please feel free to send me a note if you have any questions. Thanks. Enjoy the readings.